An unexpected attack has shaken the very foundations of the Gulf. Israel struck Doha, the capital of Qatar, and what at first seemed like just another military escalation may prove to be a turning point in global geopolitics. This episode was not an isolated event. It took place at the heart of a nation that hosts the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, the Al Udeid Air Base, where about 10,000 troops are stationed, according to data from the U.S. Department of Defense. In addition, in May 2024, Qatar signed economic and defense agreements with Washington worth more than $1.2 trillion, according to Qatar's Ministry of Finance. How could such a close ally of the United States become the target of an Israeli strike? That is the question that exposes the scale of the crisis now unfolding before us. Welcome to Telnomics, the channel where numbers turn into power and reveal how political decisions shape the destiny of entire nations. Today, we go beyond the headlines. You will understand how this attack not only sparked outrage, but may reopen old wounds and place at risk alliances that have been built over decades. Every minute, new information emerges, and each detail shifts the fragile balance of a region that holds over 60% of the world's oil reserves, according to the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries in 2024. The shock in Doha also raises questions about the future of the Abraham Accords, signed just 5 years ago between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, with the tacit support of Saudi Arabia. What do these treaties mean now, if Israel feels free to strike a neighbor without fearing retaliation? Were the commitments to peace merely illusions propped up by economic interests? Or is this the moment when the Muslim world decides to turn words into action? The streets of Qatar and across other Arab states echo with simple yet powerful questions. If Doha, with all its strategic weight and billion-dollar alliances, is not safe, then who is? This attack was not merely against a territory, but against the very idea of stability in the Gulf, signaling that no pact, however costly or solid it may seem, can guarantee absolute security. The strike on Doha was more than just a military action. It was a direct blow to the very heart of Arab diplomacy. For years, Qatar built its image as a mediator, hosting negotiations between Palestinian factions, reconciliation meetings among Middle Eastern rivals, and even discreet talks with Western powers. This role gave the country prestige and international credibility, projecting Doha as a capital of mediation amid regional chaos. But when Israel chose to launch missiles directly at this territory, the message was unmistakable. Not even neutrality is untouchable. The Qatari Prime Minister declared that the episode represented an attack on the very principle of mediation, warning that ignoring such acts only fuels an endless spiral of violence. The symbolic weight cannot be overstated. By striking Doha, Israel did not just target military facilities, but the very notion that dialogue still has a place in the Middle East. This perception is amplified by Qatar's history of investing billions into peace efforts and positioning itself as a bridge between worlds that rarely communicate. Now that reputation lies in ruins. After all, if even the mediator becomes a victim, how can negotiations be trusted? How can anyone believe that agreements signed in luxurious halls can withstand the force of a missile? While foreign ministers debate in summit meetings, the people of the Gulf react with anger and fear. For many, the attack on Doha is a warning sign. If the country most active in seeking peaceful solutions can be targeted, then no state is truly protected. This insecurity shakes not only governments but entire societies, prompting them to question whether it is worth placing faith in treaties that offer no real guarantees. The irony is harsh. The nation that most championed dialogue has now become the symbol of regional vulnerability. This shock leaves behind an uncomfortable question. Will the attack on Doha be remembered as a turning point that transformed speeches into action, or merely as further evidence that Arab diplomacy is unable to defend its own leading actors? The contradiction becomes even more striking when we look at the role of the United States in this equation. Qatar is not just any ally. It hosts the largest American military base in the Middle East, the Al Udeid Air Base, where around 10,000 U.S. troops are stationed according to the Department of Defense. Moreover, in May 2024, Doha and Washington signed economic and defense agreements valued at more than $1.2 trillion, according to Qatar's Ministry of Finance. With such massive figures and such a strategic partnership, how can it be explained that Israel attacked this very territory without an immediate barrier being raised? The dilemma is clear. If even a privileged partner of the United States cannot avoid aggression, then what is the true scope of American protection? For many analysts, the answer lies in Washington's selectivity. President Donald Trump stated publicly that he was unhappy with the attack on Doha, yet avoided issuing any direct condemnation of Israel. The message is ambiguous. The United States expresses concern, but takes no action to impose clear limits on its Israeli ally. This stance reinforces the idea that security in the Gulf is conditional, subject to interests that extend far beyond collective defense. For Arab populations, this contradiction erodes trust. After all, what is the use of hosting the world's largest American base if, when bombs fall, the response is purely rhetorical? For regional leaders, the attack is a painful reminder that, even after investing billions in alliances and treaties, sovereignty remains fragile. And this raises the inevitable question: to what extent is Washington willing to sacrifice Gulf stability in order to preserve its historic alliance with Israel? This is the point where the narrative shifts into latent tension. When the protection of a superpower fails to prevent attacks against its own allies, the very foundation of the regional security architecture begins to crack. And this crack threatens to widen into a fracture capable of destabilizing not just Qatar, but the entire geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Doubts grow deeper when examining the complexity of the strike itself. Military analysts emphasize that the operation required flying over Syrian, Iraqi, and Saudi airspace, as well as mid-air refueling, an extremely monitored procedure by Allied radar systems. According to the Middle East Institute, it would be virtually impossible to carry out such an incursion without U.S. and British bases detecting the movements. This raises the uncomfortable question: if Western powers knew, why did they do nothing to stop it? Former UN Special Rapporteur Michael Link reminded in an interview that the United States has the technological capacity to track any aircraft crossing the region. If this monitoring failed, it represents an unacceptable negligence. But if it did not fail, then the silence in the face of aggression suggests complicity. This perception undermines the mutual trust narrative that legitimizes the Western presence in the Gulf. After all, how can billion-dollar military bases be justified if, at the most critical moment, the promised protection does not materialize? The contradiction becomes sharper because Israel does not conceal its strategy. By striking Doha, it sought not only to weaken Hamas, but also to test Arab patience and expose the Gulf states' dependence on the West. The result was immediate. Emergency meetings in Doha produced only statements of condemnation, with no practical measures. The risk is that such gatherings devolve into mere political theater, stages where leaders perform indignation with no real intention of action. This situation creates a dangerous perception that Arab diplomacy has been reduced to an empty ritual. Condemnations are issued, cameras capture symbolic gestures, but the reality remains unchanged. And if summits amount to nothing more than formalities, then what is the true political weight of the Arab world in the face of cross-border attacks that openly defy treaties? This is the question now echoing across the region, slowly eroding the foundations of its credibility. The contrast between past and present makes the strike on Doha even more revealing. In 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, Arab states led by Saudi Arabia used oil as a political weapon. The embargo imposed on the West caused oil prices to quadruple within just a few months, according to the International Energy Agency, plunging European and North American economies into recession. It was proof that when united, energy producers could reshape the global order. Today, half a century later, the situation is the opposite. Despite possessing more wealth, larger reserves, and advanced technology, Arab leaders limit themselves to issuing statements of condemnation without imposing sanctions or real ruptures. Meanwhile, the humanitarian tragedy worsens. United Nations data published in 2024 reported that more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of Israeli offensives. And yet, the countries that normalized relations with Israel after the Abraham Accords have not suspended trade or military agreements. On the contrary, according to Israel's National Institute of Economics, trade with the Gulf surpassed $9 billion in 2023, a striking increase in the midst of military operations. On the streets, this duplicity is perceived as betrayal. For Arab citizens, the official silence in the face of such blatant aggression is a painful reminder that economic interests are prioritized over collective dignity. This undermines the legitimacy of ruling elites and opens space for social movements and radical voices promising to do what governments will not: respond. Popular frustration turns into fuel for political instability, corroding already fragile regimes. This disconnect between elites and populations creates a dangerous fault line. On one side, billion-dollar treaties and contracts upheld by the promise of stability. On the other, societies that watch helplessly as Gaza is destroyed and Doha is attacked. With every diplomatic silence, the gap between rhetoric and reality widens, and with it, the certainty that Arab leadership, once capable of bending the West, has become hostage to its own alliances. The strike on Doha must also be seen as part of a broader pattern. Since 2020, Israel has carried out military operations in at least 7 Arab countries, including Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and now Qatar, according to the Middle East Institute. Each of these incursions has been framed as an act of self-defense, but in practice, they reveal an expanding reach that rarely faces tangible consequences. The more frequently borders are crossed without response, the stronger the sense of impunity becomes. At the same time, economic ties between Israel and the Gulf states are growing at an astonishing pace. Israel's National Institute of Economics recorded that in 2023, trade volume with Gulf nations surpassed $9 billion, a historic record. Strategic sectors such as cybersecurity and advanced technology rose by 40% in the same period. These figures create a trap. The more profitable the partnerships, the lower the political willingness to risk ruptures in the name of sovereignty. This paradox corrodes government legitimacy. While elites benefit from contracts and investments, entire populations see lives and territories sacrificed in exchange for billion-dollar deals. On social media and in the streets, the growing narrative is that passivity in the face of attacks on Gaza or Doha amounts to complicity. This perception erodes trust in institutions and strengthens voices calling for drastic measures. The cycle is clear. Israel advances, the West provides political cover, Arab leaders retreat, and populations rise in anger. The result is a Middle East where each act of aggression not only weakens borders, but also dissolves the internal credibility of regimes already standing on shaky ground. In this context, the inevitable question emerges. How long can economic alliances serve as a shield for governments unable to protect even their own territories? The strike on Doha represents more than just another turbulent chapter in regional politics. It exposes the collapse of a security model that no longer holds. Qatar's neutrality has been bombed, America's promise of protection has proven fragile, and Arab leadership has revealed itself incapable of turning outrage into concrete action. This combination of factors creates a historic crossroads. Either Muslim countries find the courage to redefine their priorities, or they will remain hostage to alliances that guarantee stability only on paper, not in practice. The data speaks for itself. In 2024, the United Nations confirmed more than 30,000 Palestinian deaths since the start of Israeli offensives, while trade flows between Israel and the Gulf surpassed $9 billion, according to Israel's National Institute of Economics. This contradiction is unsustainable. How can solidarity be claimed while commerce flourishes alongside suffering? The risk is that the growing gap between discourse and reality will finally destroy the legitimacy of governments already under internal pressure. Yet, there is still a choice. Qatar, as the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, according to the International Energy Agency, has the weight to turn vulnerability into power if it chooses to condition its contracts on regional security. In the same way, Gulf countries could, if united, impose real economic costs, just as they did in 1973. The difference is that now, in a globalized world, those costs would be even higher, not only for the West, but also for Israel. The future of the Middle East will depend on the answer to one simple but decisive question. Will the region remain trapped in a cycle of attacks followed by silence, or will it be able to break free from the logic of submission? That answer will not be written only in treaties, but also in the streets, in economies, and in the ability of each leadership to confront its own contradictions. And here is an invitation. If you want to continue following analyses that connect numbers, power, and geopolitics, subscribe to Telnomics, like this video, and leave your comment. Your voice is also part of this global debate. Thank you for being with us, and until the next video.